We're already on the trip. We only invited people who actually matter. Just send over the beach house keys. Don't make a scene. That was my stepmother, Diane, calling from my beach house, the one my late father left me, telling me I wasn't family enough to be invited to my own family vacation. I smiled. I hung up. 3 days later, I did send the keys, tucked inside a sealed envelope, and when Diane opened it at a charity gala in front of 85 guests, she screamed so loud the string quartet stopped playing. But what was inside that envelope? And why it made a 58-year-old woman lose everything she'd spent 4 years stealing? That's the part I need to tell you from the beginning. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Abigail Vance. I'm 34 years old. I'm a landscape architect in Massachusetts. And this is the story of how I almost lost my father's house and found my own voice instead. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in late June, the day the phone call changed everything. Before I can explain the envelope, you need to understand what Whitecrest means to me. Whitecrest is a shingle-style house perched on a bluff in Truro, Cape Cod, overlooking the Atlantic. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a view that makes you forget you have a phone. Harborline Associates appraised it at $6.8 million in January of 2024, but to me, it was never about the number. It was about the man who bought it. My father, Raymond Vance, was an estate attorney with a quiet practice in Hyannis and the kind of handshake that made people trust him before he said a word. He purchased Whitecrest in 2003, when I was 11, 2 years after my mother lost her battle with ovarian cancer. The house was supposed to be a fresh start. And for a while, it was. Every summer, Dad and I would repaint the fence posts, replace the warped porch boards, and sit outside with his rolled-up blueprints, while he quizzed me on load-bearing walls and dormer angles. That porch is where I decided to become an architect. That porch is where my father became my best friend. Then he remarried. Diane Ashford came into our lives when I was 18 and already packing for Boston University. She was polished, articulate, and very good at making my father feel needed. Meredith, their daughter, arrived a year later. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, every time I came home to Whitecrest, I felt less like a daughter and more like a guest. Dad used to say something that I never fully understood until much later. "This house is yours, Abby. I've made sure of that on paper." I thought he was just being sentimental. I'd never once read his will. 2 weeks after his funeral, Diane changed the locks. She said it was for security. I told myself it was just a lock. But looking back, it was the first door she closed on me. The locks were only the beginning. Over the next 4 years, Diane dismantled my place in the family the way you'd remove a stain from fabric. Patiently, methodically, until no trace remained. Thanksgiving 2021. 5 months after Dad passed, Diane told me the gathering was too small, just immediate family processing grief. I found out later there were 14 people at the table, including Diane's sister and 2 neighbors I'd never met. Christmas 2022, I was invited, but seated at a folding card table near the kitchen while Meredith's friends filled the dining room. I carved the turkey. I served the pie. No one thanked me. Then there was the group chat. Our family iMessage thread, Vance Family, had existed since 2019. In September of 2022, I noticed I'd stopped receiving messages. When I asked Diane, she laughed softly. "Oh, we started a new one for planning. Must have been a glitch." There was no glitch. There was no invitation to the new thread either. But the part that kept me tethered, the part I'm almost embarrassed to admit, was the charity. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund was established in Dad's name 3 months after he died. Its mission was to fund shoreline restoration along Cape Cod, something Dad had championed his entire career. I wanted to honor him, so I contributed $2,000 a month, every month, without fail. $24,000 a year. I sent the money under my own name, but when the fund's annual report came out each December, my contributions appeared under a single line, the Ashford Vance family. My name was nowhere. I was sending $24,000 a year into a fund that carried my father's name. I had no idea where that money was actually going. I wouldn't find out for another 18 months. And when I did, it changed everything. Tuesday, June 25th, 2:07 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I was staring at my desk clock, trying to talk myself out of making the call. Every summer, the Vance family spent a week at Whitecrest. Every summer, I tried to coordinate my project schedule around it. And every summer for 4 years, I'd ended up alone, uninvited, or invited too late, or told the dates had shifted. But I kept trying, because trying was all I had left of belonging. Diane picked up on the third ring. I heard waves. I heard laughter. Meredith's, high and careless somewhere nearby. I heard ice clinking in a glass. "We're already on the trip," Diane said, her voice breezy, as though she were declining a telemarketer. "We only invited people who actually matter." A pause. Then lower. "Just send over the beach house keys. Don't make a scene." I didn't speak for several seconds. In the background, Meredith said something I couldn't make out, and both of them laughed. Then Diane added, almost as an afterthought, "And while we're at it, Marcus is drafting something for you to sign. It's about the house. It's time we made things official, Abigail. Your father would have wanted the whole family to share it." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my studio with my hands flat on the desk, my chest tight, my vision slightly blurred. Then I opened my email. There it was, sent 45 minutes before the call. From Marcus Bentley, attorney at law. A voluntary quitclaim deed, transferring sole ownership of Whitecrest to the Ashford Vance Family Trust. Signature deadline, 10 days. My father's signature was in his will, leaving me that house. And someone was asking me to erase it. That's when I picked up the phone again. Not to call Diane, but to dial a number I'd saved in my contacts for 4 years and never once used. Thomas Calloway, my father's oldest friend. Thomas Calloway's office sat on a quiet side street in Hyannis, above a nautical bookshop that smelled like cedar and salt. I was there by 2 o'clock the next afternoon, June 26th, sitting across from a 61-year-old man with silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of steady calm that told me he'd been expecting this call for a long time. "Your father asked me not to reach out first," Thomas said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "He said you'd come when you were ready." Inside was a certified copy of Raymond Vance's last will and testament, amended March 15th, 2021, 3 months before he died. I'd been given a copy at the reading, but I'd never studied it closely. Grief does that. You file things away and tell yourself you'll read them later, and later turns into years. Thomas guided me to the section on Whitecrest. The language was unambiguous. The property was bequeathed solely to Abigail Elaine Vance, free and clear. Not marital property. Not trust eligible. Mine. Then he turned to a clause I'd never noticed. Article 14.3, the forfeiture provision. It read, in part, "Should any beneficiary or related party be proven to have misappropriated, fraudulently transferred, or misused any asset within this estate, including any charitable fund bearing the testator's name, that party's entire inheritance share shall be forfeited and redirected to the preservation fund under the executor's management." I read it twice. Then I looked at Thomas. "Your father designed this as a safety lock," he said. He knew Diane. He didn't trust her with the finances. But he also didn't want a war before there was proof. Thomas paused, removed his glasses, and met my eyes. "I'm the executor, Abigail. I have the legal authority to activate that clause. But I need evidence. Real, documented evidence." "Your father didn't leave you unprotected," he said quietly. "He just trusted you'd find your way here when you were ready." I left that office holding a folder that felt heavier than it looked, and for the first time in 4 years the weight wasn't grief. It was possibility. Thomas made one phone call, and Nina Aldridge was in my life by Thursday morning. Nina was 37, a forensic accountant who'd spent 6 years at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office before going independent. She had a shaved undercut, tortoiseshell glasses, and a way of looking at spreadsheets the way most people look at crime scenes, with focus, patience, and a total absence of sentiment. Thomas hired her on my behalf for $8,500, which I paid out of savings. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought that didn't have walls. Between June 27th and June 30th, Nina pulled 3 years of financial records from the Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. What she found made me sit down. $340,000 had been dispersed under line items labeled event management fees and consulting services. The vendors listed were either non-existent or traceable to a single shell LLC, Ashford Creative, registered in Delaware in August of 2022. The sole member of that LLC was Meredith Vance. The money flowed from the fund into Ashford Creative's account, then straight into Meredith's personal Wells Fargo checking account. 17 separate transactions over 28 months. And my $24,000 a year? Logged in the fund's donor records under the Ashford Vance family. My name. Erased. Nina compiled a 47-page report, notarized on July 7th, with copies of the LLC filing, bank transaction histories obtained legally through a subpoena Thomas secured as executor, and a 1-page summary timeline mapping every dollar to every date. "The paper trail is clean, Abigail," Nina told me, squaring the pages on her desk. "They weren't even careful. They didn't think anyone would look. $340,000. Every cent traceable. But I didn't go to the police. I didn't call Diane, because Thomas told me there was a better way. And it started with a gala invitation that had just arrived in my mailbox." The night of June 30th, I sat alone in my apartment in South Boston with everything laid out on the kitchen table like evidence at a trial: the certified copy of Dad's will, Nina's 47-page report, the quitclaim deed from Marcus Bentley, and a cream-colored invitation, embossed in navy ink. "The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund cordially invites you to our annual benefit gala. July 12th, Harbor View Hotel, Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard. Cocktails at 6 p.m., dinner and program to follow. 85 confirmed guests." The guest list read like a who's who of Cape Cod philanthropy: the president of Cape Cod 5 Bank, 2 Edgartown selectmen, 3 real estate attorneys, Margaret Hale from the Cape Cod Times, and a representative from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit division, invited by Diane herself no less, to demonstrate the fund's transparency. I picked up the framed photo of Dad from the bookshelf. He was standing on the White Crest porch, sleeves rolled, squinting into the sun, holding a paintbrush like a conductor's baton. I could almost hear him. "A house is just wood and nails, Abby, but what you build inside it, that's the legacy." At 11:47 that night, I wrote Thomas an email. "I'm not signing the quitclaim. I'll be at the gala. Let's do this the right way." He responded in 9 minutes. "Your father always said you'd know when it was time. I'll file the motion with Barnstable Probate Court on Monday. Hearing date, July 18th. I closed my laptop and looked at the table again. In 12 days, I would walk into a room where my stepmother was queen, and I would hand her an envelope that could end her reign. I had spent 4 years being the person who didn't make a scene. That era was over. I sometimes wondered whether Diane ever lay awake at night worrying that someone might look too closely. Based on what happened next, I don't think she lost a minute of sleep. On July 2nd, Meredith emailed me. The subject line was a single heart emoji. The message was not as gentle. "Mom says you haven't signed the deed yet. She's putting you on the gala guest list as a courtesy, but she really hopes you won't make this awkward for everyone. Dad would hate that. Dad would hate that." She used our dead father as a leash, and she didn't even flinch typing it. The same day, Thomas flagged something in the court filings. Marcus Bentley had filed a claim on July 1st at Barnstable Probate Court, arguing that Whitecrest was a jointly held marital asset. That because Raymond had used income earned during his marriage to Diane for property maintenance and taxes, Diane had a lawful equitable interest. It was a stretch, but it was strategic. If a judge entertained it, the case could drag on for months. Then Thomas obtained the gala's run of show from a board member he knew. The plan was surgical. After a tribute video for Raymond, Diane would take the stage to announce that the Vance family has unanimously agreed to transfer Whitecrest into the Ashford Vance Family Trust as a community coastal center. She intended to present it as a done deal, my signature already implied, in front of 85 influential witnesses. By the time the truth came out, social pressure would have cemented the narrative. But buried in that same guest list, Thomas noticed a name that made him pause. Margaret Hale, investigative reporter for the Cape Cod Times, specializing in nonprofit governance. Diane had invited her for the PR. She had no idea she'd handed us a front-row witness. She built her own stage, Thomas said over the phone that evening, and she doesn't know we're about to use it. The 7 days between July 3rd and July 10th were the quietest of my life, and the most deliberate. I worked with Thomas and Nina every evening after my regular project hours. We assembled the package, a certified copy of the amended will with Article 14.3 highlighted, Nina's notarized 47-page audit report, finalized and signed on July 7th, a single-page timeline summarizing every fraudulent transaction with dates and dollar amounts, and copies of the Ashford Creative LLC registration alongside the corresponding bank transfers. During the days, I kept my head down and finished what I'd started. I delivered the final restoration drawings for the Eastham Lighthouse to Gerald Whitmore, chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, on July 8th, 2 days ahead of schedule. Gerald was 70, with sun-weathered hands and a voice like gravel wrapped in kindness. He studied my plans for a long time, then looked up. "You're the most meticulous architect I've ever worked with, Abigail," he said. "Your father would be proud." I nearly broke right there in his office. I didn't. I thanked him, shook his hand, and drove home. That night, I placed everything into a single cream-colored envelope, the same shade as the gala invitation. I slid the spare Whitecrest keys in first, then the documents. I sealed it with clear packing tape and wrote on the front, in my neatest handwriting, "For Diane Ashford Vance," as requested. She wanted the keys. They were in there, exactly as she'd demanded. But so was everything else. I didn't lose sleep those 7 days. For the first time in 4 years, I slept like someone who had stopped pretending. Pretending that silence was peace, that compliance was love, that giving everything away was the price of belonging. The envelope sat on my nightstand like a quiet grenade. In 48 hours, I'd deliver it in person. The morning of July 12th, I boarded the Steamship Authority ferry at Woods Hole with a shoulder bag containing the sealed envelope, a fully charged phone, and the Eastham Lighthouse drawings, just in case anyone at the gala needed a reminder of what I actually did for a living. The crossing to Vineyard Haven took 45 minutes. I stood on the upper deck and watched Cape Cod shrink behind me, the wind pulling at my hair, and I thought about every ferry ride I'd taken with Dad as a kid. How he'd always buy me a cranberry juice and point out the osprey nests on the channel markers. He made everything feel safe, even open water. Harbor View Hotel in Edgartown is a white clapboard landmark from 1891, all wraparound porches and widows' walks, perched on a hill above the harbor. The gala would begin at 6, cocktails on the veranda, dinner in the main ballroom. 85 guests, bank presidents, selectmen, attorneys, philanthropists, Margaret Hale with her reporter's notebook, and Victoria Marsh from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit division, who Diane had personally invited to certify the fund's credibility. Diane's stage, Diane's crowd, Diane's night. I checked in at 4, hung my navy blazer on the back of the bathroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed holding the envelope. My phone buzzed. Thomas, texting from the next ferry. "I'm 30 minutes behind you, but heads up, Marcus Bentley just filed an emergency motion to postpone the July 18th hearing. Wants 60 more days for discovery. If the judge grants it, Diane buys herself 2 months to spin this. Tonight matters more than ever." I set the phone down, looked at the envelope, and exhaled. In 2 hours, I would walk into a room full of people who believed Diane Ashford Vance was the guardian of my father's legacy, and I would show them the truth. Or lose everything trying. 6:15. The veranda was already crowded. Linen suits, sundresses, champagne flutes catching the last of the golden light over Edgartown Harbor. A string quartet played Debussy near the railing. Everything smelled like roses and salt air and money. I stepped through the French doors and Diane found me within seconds, as though she'd had someone watching the entrance. She was radiant. Cream silk dress, pearl earrings, a smile so wide and warm you'd think she'd been counting the days until she saw me. "Abigail, you made it!" She kissed the air near my cheek and gripped my elbow, steering me toward the far corner of the veranda before I could greet anyone else. The moment we were out of earshot, the warmth evaporated. "Did you bring the keys?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus has the paperwork inside. We can do this quietly during cocktails. Sign, smile, and no one needs to know the details." I held her gaze. "I brought the keys, Diane. You'll get them tonight." Something flickered behind her eyes. Relief? Maybe, or triumph. She squeezed my arm. "Good girl." She walked away, and within a minute Meredith materialized beside a group of guests near the bar, champagne in hand, gesturing toward me with a smile. "Abigail is such a sweetheart. She's going to help us turn Whitecrest into something the whole community can enjoy." I didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the room. Margaret Hale was at the bar, notebook open, pen moving. Victoria Marsh, mid-40s, dark blazer, no champagne, was talking to the Cape Cod 5 president near the hydrangeas. And behind the ballroom's side door, I could see Diane testing the microphone on the stage, leaning toward the event coordinator. "After the tribute video, I'll make the announcement about Whitecrest. Keep the lights on me." Thomas arrived at 6:40, caught my eye from the entrance, and gave a single, quiet nod. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight, Abigail," Diane had whispered to me in that corner. "You're here because I allowed it. Remember that." I remembered. I would remember it for the rest of the evening. At 7:30, the ballroom lights dimmed, and 85 people turned their chairs toward the projection screen. The tribute video ran 4 minutes. It opened with a photograph of my father standing in front of the Barnstable Courthouse in 1998, young and sharp-jawed, briefcase in hand. Then came images of him at Whitecrest, painting the fence, standing on the bluff, shaking hands at a groundbreaking ceremony for a dune restoration project. My father's voice, pulled from a recorded speech, filled the room. "The coastline doesn't belong to any of us. We're just its caretakers." I watched for myself in that video. I appeared once. A blurry shape in the background of a family photo from 2017, half cut by the frame. Diane and Meredith, by contrast, filled nearly every other image. Diane at Raymond's side, at Galos. Meredith as a toddler on the Whitecrest porch. A family I barely recognized, built from photographs I'd never been invited to take. When the video ended, Diane rose and walked to the stage as though stepping into a spotlight designed specifically for her. Her voice trembled. Perfectly calibrated, just enough emotion to sound authentic without losing composure. "Raymond's dream was always that Whitecrest would serve a greater purpose," she said, one hand on her heart. "And tonight, I'm proud to announce that our family, united, has decided to transfer the property into the Ashford Vance Family Trust to become a coastal preservation center open to the public." Applause filled the room. Margaret Hale looked up from her notes. Victoria Marsh nodded approvingly. Then Diane turned, found me at table 4, and extended her hand like a queen summoning a subject. "Abigail, sweetheart, would you like to come up and say a few words? We have the paperwork ready. This is your father's legacy, after all." 85 pairs of eyes turned to me. The room was silent except for the faint clink of a glass somewhere near the back. I stood up. I picked up the envelope from beside my plate, and I walked toward the stage. Diane was smiling. The kind of smile that says I've already won. She had no idea that the envelope in my hand wasn't a surrender. The stage was small, just a riser with a podium and a single microphone, but it felt enormous. The ballroom lights were angled upward, and I could see every face in the first 3 rows clearly. Benefactors, select men, Margaret Hale with her pen frozen mid-word. Diane stood beside me, still smiling, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as though presenting a gift. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you, Diane, for that beautiful tribute," I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected. My father loved Whitecrest more than any place on earth, and he was very, very specific about what he wanted for it. I paused. The room waited. "I won't be signing the quitclaim deed tonight." I let the sentence land. Somewhere near the back, a chair creaked. Whitecrest was left to me, solely to me. In my father's final will, dated March 15, 2021, and executed by his attorney and estate executor Thomas Calloway, who is here tonight. Thomas stood at table 7. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once toward the room, and remained standing. Diane's hand slid off my shoulder. The murmuring started, low, confused, spreading table by table like wind through tall grass. I turned to Diane and held out the envelope. "You asked for the keys," I said, my voice still even. "They're in here, along with something else my father left, something I think everyone in this room should know about." Diane's composure held for exactly 3 seconds. She took the envelope, tore it open, and the Whitecrest keys clattered onto the podium. Then she pulled out the documents. I watched her eyes move across the first page. The highlighted text of Article 14.3. Then the second page, Nina's one-page summary. Summary of unauthorized disbursements. Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. Total, $340,000. The color left her face in stages like a tide retreating from sand. But Diane didn't crumble. She straightened her spine and turned to the room. "This is absurd," she said, her voice pitching upward. "Abigail is clearly acting out of grief. Marcus, tell them." She scanned the ballroom for Marcus Bentley. He was already standing at table 2, jaw tight, saying nothing. Thomas was already walking toward the stage before Diane finished her sentence. He didn't rush. He climbed the riser with the careful, deliberate posture of a man who had spent 40 years standing in front of judges, and when he reached the microphone, he spoke the way my father used to, like every word had been weighed in advance. "My name is Thomas Calloway. I served as Raymond Vance's personal attorney for 23 years, and I am the court-appointed executor of his estate." He paused, letting the credentials settle. "The will is unambiguous. Whitecrest belongs to Abigail Vance. It has never been subject to any family trust, marital claim, or shared arrangement." He turned a page in the folder he'd carried to the stage. Article 14.3 of the will contains a forfeiture clause, drafted by Raymond himself, which states that any beneficiary or related party proven to have misappropriated funds from the estate, including the charitable fund bearing his name, forfeits their entire inheritance. Then came the numbers. Ashford Creative LLC, registered in Delaware, August 2022. Sole member, Meredith Vance. Thomas read each fact as though reading a court filing. 17 separate transactions over 28 months, $340,000 disbursed as consulting and event management fees to a company with no employees, no office address, no tax filings, and no documented deliverables. Meredith shot to her feet at table 3, face flushed. "That's my consulting company. I did real work." Thomas didn't raise his voice. "The LLC has produced no invoices, no contracts, and no evidence of services rendered. The funds transferred directly to your personal bank account." Silence. Absolute ringing silence filled the ballroom. Victoria Marsh, the AG representative, set her glass on the table, pulled out her phone, and stepped toward the corridor. Margaret Hale's voice recorder had been running for 5 minutes already, its small red light glowing beside her napkin. And Marcus Bentley stood, adjusted his tie, and said quietly to Diane, "I need to speak with my client privately." Then he walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Marcus walked out, and with him walked the last person willing to defend Diane Ashford Vance in a room full of witnesses. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind more times than I can count, not because it felt good, because it felt irreversible. Diane stood at the podium, alone now, the microphone still live. The room was so quiet I could hear the harbor bell outside. She gripped the edge of the podium with both hands and did the one thing she should not have done. She kept talking. Raymond would be ashamed of you, Abigail. Her voice cracked, but not from grief, from rage. You're destroying this family for a house. No one moved. 85 people had just heard documented evidence that Diane had siphoned $340,000 from her late husband's charity, and now she was invoking his name to shame the daughter he'd specifically protected. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Gerald Whitmore, the man who'd called my lighthouse restoration work meticulous, the chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, stood up at table 5. I've worked with Abigail for 2 years, he said, his gravel voice carrying without a microphone. She restored the Eastham Lighthouse with the kind of integrity Raymond himself would have demanded. He paused, looked directly at Diane. I think we all know who's destroying what here. Scattered applause broke out, then spread, rippling across the room like a wave finding shore. Diane grabbed Meredith by the wrist and turned for the exit. But as they passed table 3, Meredith, crying now, mascara running, said something into the still-live wireless mic clipped to the floral centerpiece. You promised no one would find out, Mom. The words rang through the speakers, clear as a bell. Margaret Hale wrote them down verbatim. Diane didn't look back. The ballroom doors closed behind them, and the string quartet, unsure of what else to do, began to play again, softly, as though hoping the music might erase what everyone had just witnessed. It wouldn't. Victoria Marsh returned from the corridor and walked straight to Thomas. My office will be requesting a full audit of the fund first thing Monday, she said, her voice low but firm. This isn't just a family matter anymore. I didn't say another word after Diane left the stage. I didn't need to. The numbers had already said everything. Thursday, July 18th. 10 in the morning, Barnstable County Probate and Family Court. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn at the gala, not because I was making a statement, but because it was the only professional jacket I owned that didn't have paint on the cuffs. Thomas sat beside me at the petitioner's table. Nina was in the gallery row directly behind us, her laptop bag on her knees, ready if the judge asked for source documents. Diane sat on the opposite side with a new attorney, a gray-haired woman from a Hyannis firm I didn't recognize. Marcus Bentley had formally withdrawn from the case on July 15th, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Meredith was not present. The emergency motion to postpone had been denied. The Attorney General's office had filed a brief the previous week supporting the original hearing date, arguing that any delay risked further dissipation of estate assets while the fund remained under investigation. Thomas presented the case methodically. He entered into evidence the certified will, the forfeiture clause, and Nina's 47-page report, which had already been filed with the court 10 days earlier. Diane's new attorney challenged the standing of the forfeiture provision, arguing it was unusually punitive. Judge Eleanor Garrett listened, reviewed the will's language for several minutes, then removed her glasses. The decedent's intent was clear, she said. His language was precise, and the evidence of misappropriation is unambiguous. The forfeiture clause is hereby activated. She read the ruling slowly. Diane's entire inheritance share, the life insurance payout of $1.2 million still held in escrow, her equity interest in the fund, her claim to any jointly managed estate assets, was forfeited and redirected to the Preservation Fund under Thomas's management as executor. Whitecrest was confirmed as the sole property of Abigail Elaine Vance. No encumbrance, no dispute. Diane sat motionless through the ruling, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a point somewhere above the judge's head. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When it was over, she stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. It was the first time in 4 years that Diane Ashford Vance had nothing to say to me, and I realized, with a strange, hollow clarity, that silence was the only honest thing she'd ever given me. The article went live at 6 in the morning on Monday, July 22nd. Margaret Hale's byline ran across the top of the Cape Cod Times digital edition. Vance Foundation under state scrutiny after gala revelation. $340,000 in questionable disbursements. 2,200 words, front page of the online edition, citing the audit report, a statement from Victoria Marsh's office, and on-the-record confirmation from Thomas that the forfeiture clause had been activated by judicial order. The article did not name me as the person who brought the evidence forward. Thomas, in his capacity as executor, was the formal complainant. I was mentioned once. Abigail Vance, the sole heir to the White Crest property and a licensed landscape architect specializing in historic coastal restoration. That was enough. That was more than Diane had ever allowed me to be in print. By noon, my phone had 47 unread messages. Friends, former classmates, colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years, reaching out with some version of "I had no idea," or "I always thought something was off." Gerald Whitmore texted a single line. "Proud of you, kid." The institutional fallout was immediate. Cape Cod 5 announced the suspension of its $50,000 annual grant to the fund, pending the outcome of the Attorney General's review. 2 individual donors, both gala attendees, withdrew pledges totaling $35,000. Diane posted a Facebook status that evening. "My family is going through a difficult time. I ask for privacy." It received 12 likes and 43 comments, most of which were questions she didn't answer. Later that week, Margaret Hale called me, not for a follow-up quote, for something else entirely. "I'd heard rumors about that fund for 18 months, she said, "but no one would go on the record. No one would confirm anything. You didn't just save your house, Abigail. You gave me a source." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. My silence for 4 years hadn't protected anyone. It had only protected Diane. 3 of those 47 messages were from Meredith. I didn't open them. Not yet. By August, the dominoes had a rhythm of their own. The Attorney General's office completed its preliminary audit in the 3rd week of the month. The conclusion was exactly what Nina's report had indicated: $340,000 in funds dispersed without legitimate basis. Diane and Meredith were ordered to repay the full amount within 120 days, or face civil charges under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 12, Section 8, the state's charitable fraud statute. Ashford Creative LLC was ordered dissolved by the Delaware Division of Corporations. Diane was removed as chair of the fund's board of directors. Thomas was appointed interim administrator, with oversight from the AG's office. The fund, for the first time since its creation, had a financial structure that my father would have actually recognized. The personal toll was steep and specific. Diane's condominium in Brookline, valued at $890,000, was leveraged against the repayment obligation. Meredith sold her BMW X5 and a 28-foot sailboat. Combined with the forfeited inheritance of $1.2 million, the total financial loss for Diane and Meredith reached approximately $1.635 million, plus an estimated $95,000 in legal fees. The social cost was harder to quantify but impossible to miss. Diane was removed from the organizing committee of the Cape Cod Summer Arts Festival. Her membership at the Wiano Club was quietly revoked. No public statement, just a letter and a returned deposit. 2 families in her Brookline neighborhood, people she'd dined with for years, stopped extending invitations. "The money's traceable, the LLC is dissolved, and the AG's office has everything they need," Nina told me during our final meeting. "Financially, they're done." I thanked her, paid the remaining balance on her fee, and drove home through late summer traffic thinking about a word I hadn't used in 4 years. Enough. For the first time, it meant something different. Not, "I'm not enough," but, "This is enough. This is where it stops." The message came at 3:17 in the morning on a night in late August when I couldn't sleep either. Meredith's name glowed on my phone screen and I almost didn't open it. But something about the timestamp, the rawness of reaching out at 3 a.m., made me swipe. "I know you probably won't read this, but I didn't know about the LLC when Mom set it up. She told me it was legitimate consulting. I signed what she told me to sign. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm saying I didn't know how deep it went." I read it 4 times, sitting up in bed, the phone's blue light making my apartment feel like the bottom of a pool. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't believe her. Parts of it rang true. The way Meredith had always deferred to Diane. The way she'd been trained since childhood to nod and comply. But believing someone's confusion doesn't erase their choices. She signed every invoice. She deposited every check. The next morning, I called Nina. "Is there evidence Meredith knew the LLC was fraudulent?" Nina was quiet for a moment. "Meredith signed every invoice. She received every payment. Whether she understood the legal implications is a question for a court, not for me." Fair enough. I thought about Meredith for days after that. 26 years old, raised under Diane's roof and Diane's rules. Never taught to question, never required to earn. If I'd grown up in that house instead of on the Whitecrest porch with Dad, would I be different? I didn't know. But I knew that understanding someone's circumstances didn't mean accepting what they'd done with them. Have you ever had someone in your life who hurt you? Not out of malice, maybe, but out of weakness? Someone you couldn't quite hate and couldn't quite forgive? I'd love to hear how you handled it. Share in the comments. I didn't respond to Meredith that night, but I saved her message. I had a feeling I'd need to read it again, when I was ready to decide what kind of sister I wanted to be. September arrived the way it always does on Cape Cod, with a sharpening of the light and a thinning of the crowds, and for the first time, the season felt like mine. Gerald Whitmore invited me to join the Eastham Preservation Council as an architectural advisor. It was a volunteer position with no salary and a title that wouldn't impress anyone at a cocktail party, but it was the first time my name appeared on any board in the Cape Cod conservation community, and it appeared because of my work, not my last name. The Cape Cod Chronicle published a feature on the Eastham Lighthouse restoration in mid-September. The article was about the building, its history, its structural challenges, the 18 months of careful work that brought it back from the edge of condemnation. My name appeared in the fourth paragraph. Abigail Vance, the project's lead architect, has earned a reputation for meticulous preservation work that balances historical integrity with modern resilience. There was no mention of the gala, the fund, or Diane. And that was exactly what I wanted. To be known for what I built, not for what almost got taken from me. My studio's phone started ringing more often after that. 3 new restoration contracts came in from Cape Cod homeowners between September and November, totaling $420,000 in projected revenue, more than double what I'd earned the previous year. I turned down 2 podcast invitations and 1 request for a magazine profile. "It's a private matter," I told each of them. "The courts handled it." I wasn't being modest. I was being deliberate. The story I wanted to tell with my life wasn't about revenge. It was about work and roots, and the stubborn act of building things that last. Victoria Marsh sent Thomas a letter in October, thanking him for his cooperation. Her office was reviewing oversight protocols for family-managed charitable funds in Massachusetts, using the Vance case, anonymized, as a reference study. My father's name was becoming what it should have been all along, a standard, not a prop. In October, Diane reached out, not to me directly, but through Thomas. She wanted to meet. She said she wanted to talk. I agreed, but on my terms. Thomas's office in Hyannis, Thomas present as mediator, no attorney from Diane's side, no Meredith, no recordings from her end. If she wanted a conversation, it would happen in a room with clear walls and clear rules. We met on a Thursday afternoon. Diane looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe she just looked her age for the first time. No pearls, no silk. A gray cardigan buttoned to the collar, her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she never drank from. She cried. I expected that. She said, "I only wanted to protect what Raymond built." I'd expected that too. I let her finish. Then I spoke, and I'd rehearsed this not for drama but for precision, because I knew if I didn't get the words exactly right, I'd either say too little or too much. "Diane, you didn't protect what he built. You tried to take what he left for me. I don't hate you. But I won't let you have access to my life the way you've had for the last 4 years. If you want a relationship, it starts with honesty, not control." Then I laid out 3 conditions. First, All communication regarding property, finances, or estate matters would go through Thomas. No direct contact. Second, the fund repayment must be completed in full before any family gathering of any kind. Third, I would not attend any event organized under the Vance family name until the fund was restructured with independent oversight. Diane listened. She didn't argue. When I finished, she said quietly, almost to herself, "You sound just like your father." "Thank you," I said. "That's the best thing you've ever said to me." A boundary isn't a punishment, and I wanted her to understand that. It's the price of staying in someone's life when trust has to be rebuilt from nothing. I responded to Meredith's message in November, 2 months after she'd sent it. I kept it short. "I read your message. I believe you didn't understand the full picture, but you benefited from it, and that's something you have to own. If you want to talk, I'm open to it, but not as your sister who forgives everything, as someone who expects you to be honest." She wrote back within an hour, and we agreed to meet at a cafe in Falmouth, halfway between us. Neutral ground, no history attached to the walls. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Meredith looked different. Thinner. No makeup. Her nails bitten short. She held her coffee with both hands like she was cold, even though the cafe was warm. She talked more honestly than I'd ever heard her talk about anything. "Mom always told me what to think," she said. "I never questioned it. That's not an excuse. It's something I have to fix." I didn't disagree, and I didn't rush to reassure her, the way I might have a year ago. Instead, I told her the truth as I saw it. "We can build something new, Meredith, but it has to be built on things we actually choose, not on things Mom decided for us." She nodded. I suggested she start seeing a therapist, not as a condition, but as a starting point. I gave her a name. "This isn't for me," I said. "This is for you." Then, near the end, Meredith told me something I'd never known. 2 weeks before Dad died, he called her. She was 22 then, still living at home. He said, "Take care of your sister, Mare. She's going to need you." Meredith's voice broke. "I failed him. I failed both of you." I reached across the table and held her hand. The first time in 4 years I'd touched my sister without a wall between us. I didn't forgive her that day. But I opened a door. What she does with it is up to her. I drove to Whitecrest at the end of November, when the Cape was empty and the wind had teeth. The locksmith met me at 9 in the morning. I watched him change every lock on every door. Front, back, side porch, the basement hatch Dad used to call the submarine entrance. When he handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm and felt their weight the way you feel the weight of something you thought you'd lost forever. I hadn't set foot inside in 4 years. The house was intact but neglected in the way that only apathy can produce. The porch boards I'd replaced with Dad in the summer of 2018 were warped from moisture. The fence posts we'd painted together were peeling down to bare wood. The garden my mother had planted before I was born, the one Dad kept alive for 2 decades, had gone to thistle and crabgrass. Diane hadn't maintained any of it. She'd used the house the way she'd used everything, as a set piece, not a home. I hired a small crew from Truro. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was 17. I picked up a brush and started painting the fence myself. It took 3 days. My shoulders ached, my hands blistered and then calloused. And on the 3rd evening, while pulling up a rotted plank on the porch, I found a wooden box wedged under the floorboards. A cigar box, weathered but sealed with packing tape. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated March 10th, 2021. 5 days before Dad amended his will, 3 months before he died. "Abby, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back. I knew you would. The house is yours. Not because it's valuable, but because you're the only one who understands what it means. Don't let anyone tell you what your legacy should be. Build it yourself. Love, Dad." I sat on the porch where he used to sit, holding his letter in his handwriting, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because I was sad, because he'd known. He'd known all of it. What Diane would try, how long I'd wait, and that I'd come back when I was ready. He'd planned for everything, except how much I'd miss him while I figured it all out. By January 2026, the fund had a new spine. Thomas completed the restructuring over the holidays, and when he walked me through the final documents in his Hyannis office, I could see the relief on his face, the kind that comes not from victory, but from a promise finally kept. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund retained its original name. Dad had chosen it, and no one else's hands would change that. But everything underneath was rebuilt. Gerald Whitmore was installed as the new board chair, bringing with him 40 years of nonprofit governance and a zero-tolerance policy for undocumented disbursements. Nina Aldridge agreed to serve as part-time treasurer on a transparent, contracted basis. The fund's first-ever financial officer with actual forensic credentials. And the Attorney General's office mandated an independent audit every 12 months, conducted by a rotating external firm. Cape Cod 5 reinstated its $50,000 annual grant, contingent on the new audit provisions, a condition the bank had never imposed before, and one that Thomas welcomed without hesitation. Accountability, he told me, isn't a burden. It's a foundation. Then came the part that surprised even Thomas. I decided to convert Whitecrest's ground floor into a summer residency program for architecture students. 4 fellows, 6 weeks, working on real preservation projects along the Outer Cape under professional mentorship. I called it the Vance Fellowship. The first cohort would arrive in June. I kept the second floor as private space. A bedroom, a drafting table by the window, the porch where Dad's letter had waited under the floorboards. That wasn't a sacrifice. It was a design choice. The same kind Dad had taught me to make. How to share a building without losing the room that matters most. My father left me a house. I told Thomas the day we signed the fellowship's charter. I'm turning it into a school. I think he'd like that. Thomas smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I'd seen from him in 7 months. He'd like it very much, he said, but he'd still want you to repaint that fence every summer. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about Dad without it hurting. June 2026. 1 year to the week since Diane's phone call. I stood on the Whitecrest porch with a mug of coffee, watching 4 architecture students from 3 different universities measure fence posts in the early morning light. They were arguing about joist spacing, the kind of argument Dad would have loved, the kind he used to settle by handing you a level and saying, "Don't guess. Measure." My studio in South Boston now had 2 employees, Kara, a structural drafting specialist, and Leo, a recent graduate from Wentworth who reminded me of myself at 23, all precision and quiet stubbornness. Annual revenue for 2025 had come in at $680,000, up from $310,000 the year before. I'd signed a contract in April to restore a historic church in Provincetown, the kind of project that would have made Dad pull out a chair and ask me to walk him through every elevation. Meredith and I saw each other once a month. We weren't close. Not the way sisters in movies are close, but we were honest, which was better. She'd been in therapy since December. In March, she was hired as an events coordinator at a Boston nonprofit that matched low-income families with housing assistance. It was the first job she'd ever gotten without Diane's name on the application. When she told me about it over coffee, her eyes were bright in a way I'd never seen before. Not the brightness of performance, but of someone discovering, for the first time, that they could stand on their own. Diane had repaid $280,000 of the $340,000 she owed. The remaining $60,000 was on a court-approved installment plan. She did not come to Whitecrest. I did not invite her. Neither of us pretended that was temporary. Thomas visited every July. He'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and tell me stories about Dad, cases they'd argued, jokes they'd shared, the time Raymond accidentally filed a motion in the wrong county and drove 90 miles to fix it before the clerk noticed. "You're the closest thing I have to a father now," I told him once. He set down his mug and looked at the ocean. "Your father would say I'm just the messenger." I didn't win a war. I won the right to stop fighting one. The night of July 12th, 2026, exactly 1 year since the gala, I sat at the drafting table in the upstairs bedroom at Whitecrest and wrote a letter I could never send. "Dear Dad, I found the letter under the porch. I found the clause in the will. I found Thomas when I was ready. You planned for everything, except how much I'd miss you while figuring it all out. Whitecrest is a school now. There are kids here learning to measure joists the way you taught me. They don't know your name yet, but they will. One of them, a girl from Springfield who's never seen the ocean before this summer, asked me yesterday why the porch faces east instead of south. I told her what you told me. Because the morning light is honest. It shows you everything. The cracks, the beauty, all of it. She wrote it down in her notebook. You would have liked her. I didn't let them take the house, and I didn't let them take me. I think you knew I wouldn't. That's why you left me the keys. Not just to the door, but to the choice. Meredith is trying. I don't know if she'll make it all the way, but she's walking in the right direction, and I think that matters. You asked her to take care of me. She didn't. But maybe I can take care of the space between us until she's strong enough to meet me in it. I love you. I miss your handwriting and your terrible coffee, and the way you hummed when you were reading contracts. Abby. I folded the letter, walked downstairs, and placed it inside the cigar box under the porch, next to his. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the beach. The tide was out, the sand firm and cold, the sky the color of unfinished steel. I walked for a long time without thinking about Diane, or the gala, or the courtroom, or any of it. I just walked. And the ocean did what it always does. Kept going, indifferent and enormous and exactly where it was supposed to be. The horizon didn't look different, but I did. Back in Boston, I reorganized my studio on a Sunday afternoon in mid-July. The kind of quiet, methodical work that calms me the way other people are calmed by music. I hung 3 things on the wall behind my drafting table. The first was a framed copy of the opening page of Dad's will. Not the forfeiture clause, not the property section, but the preamble, where he'd written in his own hand, I leave these things not as possessions, but as responsibilities. May they be carried with integrity. The second was a photograph of the Eastham Lighthouse after restoration, taken from the bluff at sunset. Proof that broken things can be made whole if someone cares enough to learn how. The third was the charter for the Vance Fellowship, signed by its first 4 students in June, their names written in careful block letters like a kind of promise. That evening, I wrote Thomas an email. I've decided to stop attending any event that uses Vance Family as a label for anything other than the fund. From now on, I'm Abigail, an architect, a fellow, a friend. Not Raymond's daughter, not Diane's stepdaughter. Just me. He replied before I'd closed the laptop. That's the most Raymond Vance thing you've ever said. I smiled at the screen, shut it, and walked outside. South Boston in July is loud and bright and unapologetic. Car horns and laughter and someone grilling on a rooftop 3 buildings over. I stood on the sidewalk and let the city move around me for a minute, feeling something I didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Something more like alignment. The sense that the life I was living and the person I was had finally caught up to each other. I used to think legacy was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you build. One boundary, one blueprint, one honest choice at a time. That's my story. If any part of it felt familiar, the silence, the pressure, the moment you realized you deserved better, I hope this gives you permission to protect yourself the way my father protected me. Not with anger, but with preparation and principle. If this story stayed with you, please hit like and subscribe. And check the description below. There's another story there about someone who was told they'd never be enough. They proved everyone wrong. I think you'll want to hear it. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and your boundaries. We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it's fine. That's what my stepmother told me at 11:47 p.m., the very first night I slept in the beach house I'd spent 12 years saving for. $4.8 million. Every penny mine. And before I could even respond, she added, if you don't like it, you can find somewhere else. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone, but I smiled. Because I knew exactly what I was going to prepare for their arrival. What Victoria didn't know was that her phone call wasn't just rude. It was the last mistake she'd ever make under the Beckett name. And the surprise I prepared? It took 220 people, one gala stage, and a single manila envelope to deliver. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. My name is Bonnie Beckett. I'm 34 years old and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, let me take you back to March 2025, the week I quit my job and thought I was finally free. My mother died when I was 17. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in April, gone by September. 5 months. That's all the warning I got before the person who loved me most in this world simply wasn't in it anymore. My father, Gerald Beckett, was a well-respected real estate attorney in Charleston's low-country legal circle. He grieved the only way he knew how, by working until he couldn't feel anything. 2 years later, he married Victoria Hale. At first, she was warm, attentive. She brought homemade lemon bars to Sunday dinners and called me sweetheart, with what I genuinely believed was sincerity. But 6 months after the wedding, the lemon bars stopped, and so did the sweetness. It started small. Victoria suggested I move out of my childhood bedroom, the one with the window seat my mother had built, so Paige, her daughter from a previous marriage, could have a proper dressing room. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something. He squeezed my shoulder. "It's just a room, kiddo." It was never just a room. By Christmas 2011, I wasn't in the family photo. Victoria positioned everyone in front of the fireplace and somehow there was no space left when I walked in. "Oh," she said, adjusting Paige's collar. "I thought you said you didn't want to be in it." I paid for my own college. Full scholarship to the College of Charleston, plus 2 part-time jobs, one at a bookstore, and one tutoring statistics. Paige went to a private university in Savannah, tuition fully covered by my father. When I once asked him why the difference, he looked confused. "Victoria said you preferred being independent." Her favorite phrase, "I'm not being mean, I'm being practical." She used that line every single time she cut me out of something, and for 15 years, I let her. Here's the thing about being invisible inside your own family. It gives you an extraordinary amount of privacy. After graduating summa cum laude in finance, I took a junior analyst position at Meridian Strategy Group, a boutique consulting firm in downtown Charleston. Within 3 years, I was leading client engagements. Within 7, I was a senior strategy consultant managing restructuring projects for companies with revenues north of $200 million. By the time I left, my base salary plus performance bonuses totaled roughly $340,000 a year. Victoria never knew. She never asked. At family dinners, the ones I was invited to, which grew fewer each year, she'd wave her hand when my work came up. "Bonnie does something with spreadsheets." Then she'd turn to Paige. "Tell them about your new marketing campaign, sweetheart. Paige is the successful one." I let her believe that. I let all of them believe it. Starting in 2013, I funneled every dollar I didn't need into index funds and 2 rental properties, a duplex in West Ashley and a townhouse near the medical university. I lived modestly. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I wore clothes from Target to Thanksgiving dinners at my father's house, while Victoria showed off a new Cartier bracelet each year. By March 2025, my net worth sat at approximately $5.2 million. Not a soul in my family had any idea. The only person who knew everything was Marcus Trent, my attorney since 2019, a sharp-eyed specialist in real estate law and financial fraud. It was Marcus who first flagged something strange in July 2024 while reviewing my father's property records for an unrelated inheritance question. "There's a transfer deed for the Mount Pleasant house," he told me. "Gerald's signature on it looks off. I'm saving a notarized copy, just in case." I thanked him. I filed it away. I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. By February 2025, my body made the decision my mind had been postponing for years. I stopped sleeping. Not the Instagram kind. Not, oh, I only got 5 hours. I mean, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling fan for entire nights, my brain cycling through client deliverables and risk models until my chest felt like someone was standing on it. My doctor, a no-nonsense internist named Dr. Priya Langford, sat me down after my blood work came back showing cortisol levels she described as alarming. She told me to take at least 6 months off. No negotiations. I submitted my resignation on February 28th. My managing partner, Martin Collier, shook my hand and said, "The door's always open when you're ready, Bonnie." I walked out of the office carrying a single box, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't know what to do next. Then I remembered my mother. She used to talk about a little house by the ocean. Nothing fancy, just somewhere with a porch and the sound of waves. She said she'd buy it when she retired. She never retired. I found the listing on a Thursday afternoon. Sullivan's Island, just 20 minutes from Charleston. 6 bedrooms, whitewashed cedar siding, a wraparound porch that faced the Atlantic. 4,200 square feet. Listed at $4.8 million. I called Marcus. I called my mortgage broker. I put down 20%, $960,000, on March 5th and closed on March 21st. I moved in on March 22nd, a Saturday. That first night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, listening to waves break against the shore, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I didn't tell anyone in my family, but Paige saw an Instagram story from a mutual friend who'd tagged Sullivan's Island and recognized me in the background. She told Victoria, and that night, my phone rang. 11:47 p.m. Victoria's number glowing on my screen. I hadn't answered a call from her in 3 months, but something about that first night in the house, the wine, the waves, the foolish feeling that maybe things could be different, made me pick up. "Paige told me about your little beach house," Victoria said. No hello. No congratulations. Her voice had that clipped, organizing tone she used when rearranging furniture or rearranging people's lives. How nice. "Listen. Your father and I need a change of scenery. The city's been exhausting. We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it's fine." I was silent for 5 seconds. She filled them. "The master bedroom, obviously. Paige will take the room with the ocean view. You can have the one in the back. It's small, but you're used to small." My free hand gripped the porch railing. Did Dad actually say that? Can I talk to him? He's sleeping. Don't wake him, you know his heart. And honestly, Bonnie, if you don't like it, you can find somewhere else. It's not like you can't afford a motel. My hands were trembling. My jaw was locked. But my voice came out steady, almost gentle. "Sure, Victoria. I'll prepare everything for your arrival." She hung up without saying goodbye. She never said goodbye. I sat in the dark for 20 minutes, staring at the ocean I couldn't see. Then I called my father. It was 12:15 a.m. He picked up on the second ring, wide awake. "Sweetheart," he said, "I didn't say any of that. Victoria told me you invited us down for the weekend." That's when it clicked. The same way it must have clicked for Marcus 8 months earlier, staring at a signature that didn't match. If Victoria could forge my father's words to my face, forging his name on a piece of paper was nothing. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't sad. I was clear. At 7 the next morning, I called Marcus Trent. "The notarized copy of the Mount Pleasant transfer deed," I said. "The one with the signature that looked off. I need to see it. Today." Marcus didn't ask why. He'd known me long enough to recognize the shift. By 9:30 a.m., the documents arrived in my encrypted email, a scanned copy of a transfer deed dated April 12, 2024, conveying my father's family home in Mount Pleasant, valued at $1.2 million, to an entity called Hale Premier Properties, LLC. I'd never heard of it. Neither, I was certain, had my father. I pulled up the South Carolina Secretary of State's business registry. Hale Premier Properties, LLC had been registered in November 2022. Sole member, Victoria R. Hale. No other officers, No other names. Then I did what 12 years of consulting had trained me to do. I compared signatures. I pulled Gerald Beckett's signature from the transfer deed and laid it beside his signatures on his will, his medical power of attorney, and a birthday card he'd sent me in 2023. The differences were immediate. The capital G in Gerald was missing its distinctive loop. The pen pressure was uneven. Heavy at the start, light at the finish. The hallmark of someone drawing a shape rather than writing a name. Marcus confirmed what I already knew. This isn't a sloppy day. This is a simulated forgery. But we need a certified expert to make it hold. He recommended Patricia Sloan, a forensic document examiner accredited by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners. She'd testified in over 40 federal cases. If she said the signature was forged, no court in South Carolina would argue. There's something else, Marcus said. I found 3 withdrawals from Gerald's IRA, totaling $380,000, routed to an account at Coastal Heritage Bank under the name V. Hale. We'll need a subpoena for the full statements. I stared at the screen. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was a felony. They arrived at 10 the next morning, 2 black SUVs packed to the roof with luggage, decorative pillows, and what appeared to be an entire set of monogrammed bath towels. Victoria stepped out first, designer sunglasses pushed up into her platinum hair, scanning the property the way a buyer surveys a foreclosure. Not bad, she said, for a starter home. A starter home, 4,200 square feet, $4.8 million. She walked straight to the master bedroom as if she'd already memorized the floor plan. Within an hour, my clothes were in a pile on the hallway floor, and her garment bags hung in my closet. Paige took the room with the ocean view. I was directed to the smallest room on the first floor. The one originally meant to be a linen storage area. In my own house. My father trailed behind them, carrying a single duffel bag, looking like a man who'd been loaded into the wrong car. He caught my eye in the hallway and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I shook my head slightly. Not yet. That evening, Victoria invited 3 couples from her social circle for dinner, on no notice, with groceries I'd bought. She toured them through every room, her hand sweeping across the open kitchen like a game show host. Gerald always wanted a beach house, she told them, beaming. So I made it happen. Not one person at that table knew I owned the house. Not one person asked. I washed the dishes. I smiled. And at 9:47 p.m., my phone vibrated with an email from Marcus. Patricia Sloan had completed her preliminary examination. Her finding, the signature on the Mount Pleasant deed was, quote, highly likely to be a simulation forgery. I dried the last glass, set it on the shelf, and went to my tiny room. At 11, when the house was quiet, a second email arrived from Marcus. The subject line read, "Call me first thing tomorrow. This is bigger than we thought." I waited until 6:45 a.m., then slipped out the back door and walked down to the beach. The tide was low, the sand still dark with moisture. I called Marcus from the waterline, where the waves would cover my voice. The IRA withdrawals were just the start, he said. She opened a supplementary credit card under Gerald's name, his social security number, his credit history, her as authorized user. Current balance, $47,000. Charges include a luxury spa retreat in Hilton Head, 2 Chanel handbags, a first-class flight to New York, none of which Gerald has any record of approving. I closed my eyes. The ocean roared in front of me. And there's a third account, Marcus continued. A savings account titled V. Hale Trust at the same bank, $215,000. Source, transfers from their joint household account, categorized as household expenses. I did the math standing there with salt water soaking through my sneakers. The Mount Pleasant house, $1.2 million. The IRA, $380,000. The credit card, $47,000. The trust account, $215,000. Total, approximately $1.842 million. Stripped from my father without his knowledge while he recovered from a mild heart attack and trusted his wife to manage the household. That same afternoon, Patricia Sloan filed her official report. Report number PS202500087. Her conclusion was unambiguous. The signature on the April 12 transfer deed was a simulated forgery, assessed at the highest probability level the discipline recognizes. We're looking at forgery in the first degree and exploitation of a vulnerable adult, Marcus said. Both felonies under South Carolina Code. What do you want to do? If I report it now? Victoria gets arrested. Gerald gets blindsided. The whole city knows by dinner. And if there's another way? Marcus paused. The Low Country Bar Association's annual charity gala is June 14th. Victoria's being honored, Philanthropist of the Year. If any of that stolen money flowed into the foundation, the award is built on fraud. He let the implication hang. You want to end this in a police station, or on the stage she built for herself? I knew the answer before he finished the question. 84 days. That's what I had between March 23rd and June 14th. The night of the gala. I broke the plan into 3 phases. Phase 1, March through April. Compile every piece of evidence into a file that could withstand scrutiny from a judge, a journalist, or a room full of lawyers. Phase 2, May. Protect my father. Transfer oversight of his finances to an independent fiduciary, get his health stabilized, and prepare him for what was coming. Phase 3, the first 2 weeks of June. Coordinate the reveal at the one event Victoria cared about more than anything on earth. Marcus filed the subpoena request with Charleston County Court on March 28th. Estimated turnaround, 30 to 45 days. Patricia Sloan was already working on her full forensic comparison. The pieces were moving, but I needed one more person. Someone whose credibility Victoria couldn't dismiss and whose platform could outlast a single evening. I called Della Fairchild. Della was 52, a senior editor at the Charleston Society Review, the magazine that chronicled every gala, fundraiser, and garden party in Low Country high society. More importantly, she had been my mother's college roommate. They'd stayed close until the end. Della was one of the last people to visit my mother in hospice. When I told her what I'd found, the line went quiet for a long time. Then Della said, "I've had doubts about Victoria for years. She donates big but never lets anyone see the books. Every time I pitched an audit story, my publisher killed it. Too many advertisers in her circle." Della agreed to attend the gala as a credentialed member of the press. If the evidence held, she would publish a full investigative piece in the Charleston Society Review, a publication with 85,000 readers among the Low Country elite. "One condition," she said. "Every document gets verified independently before I write a word." I wouldn't have it any other way. Living with Victoria in the beach house for those weeks was like sharing a cage with someone who didn't know the lock was already broken. April settled in, and so did she. She changed the locks on the master bedroom, my master bedroom, without asking. She hired a decorator to redo the living room in what she called coastal chic: new throw pillows, a driftwood coffee table, a $6,000 linen sectional. The invoice for $12,000 arrived in my mailbox with a sticky note. "Bonnie, take care of this. XOV. I paid it. I needed her comfortable. I needed her careless." Every Friday, she hosted what she called sunset socials, 5 or 6 couples from her Charleston circle, drinking my wine on my porch, listening to Victoria narrate her life as though she'd built it from scratch. I overheard her tell a woman in a cashmere wrap, "Bonnie is going through a phase, quit her little job, living off savings. We're here to keep an eye on her, really." The woman glanced at me with pity. I refilled her glass. My father pulled me aside one evening in the kitchen. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Victoria says you've been stressed, that you're not handling the career change well." "I'm fine, Dad. Better than fine." He studied my face but didn't push. Gerald Beckett had spent 63 years trusting the wrong people to tell him the truth about the people he loved. One afternoon, while Victoria was at a spa appointment, I picked up the iPad she'd left on the kitchen counter. Her browser history was still open. The most recent search: how to add name to property deed South Carolina. She wasn't just visiting, she was planning to put her name on my house. That evening, Marcus called. "Subpoena's been approved, bank statements in 2 weeks." He hesitated, But Bonnie, there's another account we haven't seen yet. The Coastal Heritage Bank statements arrived in Marcus's office on the first Monday of May, sealed in a courier envelope marked confidential. Court order enclosed. He called me at noon. I sat in my car in the Sullivan's Island public parking lot, the only place I could be certain Victoria wouldn't overhear. The V. Hale account matches what we expected. $380,000 from Gerald's IRA, deposited in 4 installments between January and October 2024. Marcus said. The credit card we already knew about. $47,000. You said there was another one. There is. A savings account titled V. Hale Trust. Balance as of last month, $215,000. All of it transferred from the joint household checking account Gerald shares with Victoria. Each withdrawal listed as household expenses. Groceries, maintenance, utilities. Except it all went to this separate account. I stared through the windshield at the marsh grass bending in the wind. Total damage? $1.2 million for the house, $380 from the IRA, $47 on the card, $215 in the trust account. Grand total, approximately $1.842 million. He let that number sit. Marcus, if I tell my father now, he'll confront her. He won't be able to help it. And that could wreck the gala plan. Or worse, his heart. I know. But he needs to hear it before that night. He needs to stand up on that stage knowing the full truth, and he needs to sign an affidavit confirming he never authorized any of it. We settled on June 1st, 13 days before the gala. Early enough for Gerald to prepare. Late enough that Victoria wouldn't have time to build a counter-narrative. That same week, Patricia Sloan sent an addendum to her report. The handwriting in the forged signature on the Mount Pleasant deed was consistent with the handwriting on the fraudulent credit card application. Same person, same pen habits, same crime. June 1st, a Sunday. I woke before dawn and watched the sky turn from charcoal to pale gold through my tiny first-floor window. Victoria wouldn't be up until 9. She never rose early on weekends. I had a narrow window. I found my father on the porch at 5:45 a.m., sitting with a cup of coffee he'd made himself, watching the pelicans glide over the breakers. "Walk with me?" I said. We took the boardwalk down to the beach. The sand was cool under our feet. I waited until we were far enough from the house that even shouting wouldn't reach. Then I opened the folder. I showed him the transfer deed, the forensic report, the bank statements, all 3 accounts. I showed him the LLC registration for Hale Premier Properties, filed in his wife's maiden name. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a client presentation. Facts first, implications second, questions at the end. Gerald read every page. His hands trembled. A vein in his temple pulsed. For 3 full minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ocean pulling at the shore. "I didn't sign this," he said finally, his voice barely audible above the waves. "I've never heard of this company. I didn't authorize any of these transfers." He pressed his palms against his eyes. When he lowered them, they were red. "I'm sorry, Bonnie. God, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you." "You didn't know, Dad." She made sure you didn't know. Gerald agreed to everything. The affidavit, the gala, the silence, until June 14th. Marcus notarized his sworn statement 2 days later at his downtown office with a certified witness present. As we walked back to the house that morning, my father stopped at the bottom of the boardwalk stairs. He pulled me into a hug, the first in 8 years, and he whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Your mother would be proud." I didn't know yet that my mother's voice would reach me one more time before this was over, in a way I never could have predicted. 13 days. Victoria spent every one of them preparing for the night she believed would crown her legacy. She hired a personal stylist, $3,500 for a single consultation. She ordered a custom champagne-colored gown from a boutique on King Street, $8,200, fitted twice, hemmed to the millimeter. Every evening after dinner, she stood in front of the master bedroom mirror and rehearsed her acceptance speech, gesturing to an invisible audience with the practiced grace of someone who'd been performing generosity her entire life. On June 8th, She told me I was expected at the gala. For appearances, she said. You'll sit in the back, obviously, but I need the family there. It looks better for the photos. She paused, then added, wear something simple. This isn't your night. Of course, Victoria. I wouldn't dream of stealing your spotlight. Behind the scenes, every gear was turning. Marcus finalized the evidence file, Gerald's affidavit, Patricia Sloane's forensic report, the complete bank statements, the Hale Premier Properties LLC registration, and a printout of Victoria's browser search history recovered from the household iPad. All originals, all verified, sealed in a manila envelope. On June 10th, Marcus met with Judge Raymond Holt, the president of the Low Country Bar Association, who was personally overseeing the gala. Marcus presented the file. Judge Holt reviewed it for 45 minutes in his chambers, asked 3 clarifying questions, and then removed his reading glasses. This is deeply serious, he said, under Section 7.3 of our association bylaws. Any substantiated allegation of financial misconduct must be addressed before an honorific is conferred. I'll make the arrangements. Victoria didn't know. She was too busy choosing between diamond studs and chandelier earrings. On June 12th, she saw me talking on the phone in the garden and stopped. Who was that? Spa, I said, booking a blowout for the gala. She looked me over. Don't go overboard, that night is mine. Then, on the evening of June 13th, one day before the gala, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I know Victoria isn't who you think she is. Meet me at Waterfront Park, 3 p.m. tomorrow. HBHB. I stared at those 2 letters until the screen went dark. I almost didn't go. The gala was hours away, and the last thing I needed was a distraction from a stranger with cryptic initials. But something about the certainty in that message. I know Victoria isn't who you think she is. Told me this person had been waiting a long time to say it. Waterfront Park, 3 p.m., June 13th. The sun was brutal, the kind of Charleston afternoon that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. I sat on a bench near the pineapple fountain and watched a woman approach. Tall, silver-haired, somewhere in her early 60s, wearing a pressed linen blazer despite the heat. She walked like someone who had rehearsed being calm. Bonnie Beckett? She extended her hand. My name is Helen Briggs. HB Helen sat beside me and told me a story I'd never heard, one Victoria had buried so deep that even Google couldn't find it easily. Before Gerald, before Charleston, before the Hale Beckett Foundation and the philanthropist persona, Victoria had been married to a man named Richard Briggs, a successful dentist in Savannah. They wed in 2005. By 2009, it was over. After Richard discovered that Victoria had quietly transferred $190,000 from their joint accounts into a personal savings account she'd opened under her maiden name. He didn't press charges, Helen said. He wanted a clean divorce, wanted to forget. I respected that for 16 years. But I saw your name in a blog post by Della Fairchild, something about women in Charleston consulting, and I recognized you, Gerald Beckett's daughter. She looked at me steadily. Victoria has a pattern, Bonnie. She finds men who are successful but trusting, takes control of the finances, and bleeds them dry. Your father is not her first victim. Helen handed me a manila folder, a certified copy of the divorce decree, Briggs v. Hale, 2009, with the phrase dissipation of marital assets highlighted in yellow. 2 husbands, 2 sets of stolen funds, the same playbook, 16 years apart. I stayed quiet because I was ashamed, Helen said. If I can help your father, I will. I thanked her. And I called Marcus before I even reached my car. The night of June 13th settled over the beach house like a held breath. Victoria was in the master bedroom, rehearsing her speech one last time. Through the door, I could hear the cadence of her voice rising and falling, grateful, humble, rehearsed to perfection. In the next room, Paige was arranging jewelry on the dresser, holding up earrings to her reflection, completely unaware that by tomorrow night, every piece of the life her mother had constructed would be scattered across a ballroom floor. My father knocked on my door at 10 o'clock. His face was drawn, but his eyes were steady. the eyes of a man who had finally stopped looking away. He held a small wooden box, walnut, with a tarnished brass clasp. "I found this," he said quietly, "in the locked drawer of Victoria's nightstand. She was at the spa this afternoon. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for my reading glasses." He opened the box. Inside were 2 handwritten pages, folded once, the paper yellowed at the edges. My mother's handwriting. I knew it instantly. The looping lowercase y. The way she crossed her T's with a slight upward slant, as if every word was reaching for something better. The letter was dated 3 days before she died. "Bonnie, my brave girl. You don't need anyone's permission to live your life. You are enough. You have always been enough. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." Victoria had kept this letter hidden for 17 years. My mother's last words to me, sealed in a box, locked in a drawer, in the bedroom of the woman who had spent a decade and a half telling me I was nothing. My father and I sat together in my small room and cried without speaking. When I could breathe again, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse, the one I'd carry tomorrow. "I won't let her down, Dad." Before I turned off the light, I passed the hallway that led to the porch. Victoria's silhouette was framed against the moonlit ocean, phone pressed to her ear. I stopped. Her voice drifted through the screen door. "Don't worry. After the gala, I'll have them transfer the deed. She won't even notice until it's done." She was talking about my house. The house I'd bought with 12 years of invisible labor, and she was planning to take it the moment her trophy was in hand. I went to bed. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., and for the first time in 84 days, I slept soundly. June 14th, 2025. The morning arrived bright and still, the kind of low-humidity Charleston day that makes everything look sharper than it has any right to be. At 8 a.m., I was in Marcus Trent's office, a glass-walled suite on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse on East Bay Street. The manila envelope sat between us on his desk like a loaded weapon laid flat. We reviewed the contents one final time, the forged transfer deed with Patricia Sloane's forensic report, number PS202500087, the Coastal Heritage Bank statements for all 3 accounts, Gerald's notarized affidavit, signed and witnessed on June 3rd, the Hale Premier Properties LLC registration, the divorce decree from Briggs vs. Hale, 2009, and a screenshot of Victoria's browser history. The search for how to add a name to a property deed in South Carolina. Time-stamped, device identified, saved to PDF. "Helen Briggs confirmed this morning," Marcus said. "She purchased a ticket through Della, table 12. She's ready." At 10 o'clock, Marcus met Judge Holt at the courthouse for a final briefing. The judge had already informed the gala's organizing committee. The Philanthropist of the Year award would be paused before presentation, pending a matter related to the nominee that requires the association's attention. The committee agreed, reluctantly, but unanimously. No one in Charleston's legal elite wanted their signature award tainted by unexamined fraud. Victoria, meanwhile, spent the morning in a state of radiant oblivion. She emerged from the master bedroom at 2 o'clock in her champagne gown, hair swept into a high chignon, diamond pendant catching the light. She surveyed me in my simple black dress and pearl earrings the way a queen surveys a chambermaid. "At least try to look like you belong there, Bonnie." I met her gaze. "Don't worry, Victoria. Tonight, everyone will know exactly where I belong." She frowned, a brief crease between perfectly filled brows, but she was already checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She had bigger things on her mind. Or so she thought. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Charleston Place was the kind of room designed to make ordinary people feel extraordinary, and extraordinary people feel immortal. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, floor-to-ceiling windows draped in ivory silk. Round tables set with bone china and sterling flatware, each one anchored by a centerpiece of white peonies and flickering votives. 220 guests, attorneys, circuit court judges, state legislators, founders of nonprofits, real estate developers, and the social columnists who chronicled their every handshake. Black tie, impeccable manners. In a room like this, Reputation wasn't just currency, it was oxygen. Victoria moved through the crowd as though the evening had been choreographed around her. She kissed cheeks. She clasped hands. She leaned in close to whisper things that made powerful people laugh. At one point, I watched her rest her palm on Judge Holt's forearm and say, with the kind of sincerity that only a lifetime of practice can produce, "I'm so humbled by this honor, Raymond. Truly." She sat at table 1, the VIP position, directly before the stage. Gerald was beside her, his posture rigid, his water glass untouched. He hadn't looked at Victoria since they'd arrived. She hadn't noticed. I was at table 18, near the service entrance, the table Victoria had assigned me. Marcus sat to my left, his briefcase tucked beneath his chair. At table 12, I could see Helen Briggs, silver hair, linen blazer, watching the room with the patience of someone who'd waited 16 years for this evening. In the press section, Della Fairchild adjusted her recorder and opened a fresh page in her notebook. At 8:30, the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the evening's awards presentation, the association has a brief announcement." Victoria straightened in her chair. She smoothed her gown. She smiled, the generous, camera-ready smile she'd been rehearsing in mirrors for weeks. Then Judge Raymond Holt rose from his seat, walked to the podium, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we have received information requiring our attention before we proceed this evening." 220 pairs of eyes turned to the stage. Victoria's smile didn't falter. Not yet. But I saw her fingers tighten around her napkin. Judge Holt's voice carried through the ballroom with the measured gravity of a man who had spent 30 years on the bench. Under Section 7.3 of the Low Country Bar Association's bylaws, any substantiated allegation of financial misconduct involving a nominee must be addressed before an award of honor is conferred. This evening, we have received a formally documented complaint, supported by forensic evidence, sworn testimony, and independently verified financial records. He paused. The complaint was filed by a member of the nominee's own family. A murmur rippled through the tables, the quiet, involuntary sound of 220 people recalibrating their expectations simultaneously. Victoria was on her feet before Judge Holt finished. "This is absurd," she said, her voice pitched perfectly between outrage and bewilderment, the voice of a woman who'd spent decades controlling rooms. "Raymond, who filed this? This is a charity event, not a courtroom." Judge Holt looked directly at me. "Ms. Bonnie Beckett, you've been invited to present your evidence." The murmur became a wave. Heads turned. Victoria's eyes found me at table 18, the back of the room, exactly where she'd put me. And for one long, suspended second, we looked at each other across 17 tables, 220 witnesses, and 15 years of silence. I stood. I picked up the manila envelope. And I walked. 17 tables. Each step deliberate, each step audible on the polished hardwood. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, could hear the rustle of evening gowns as women turned in their chairs, the clink of a water glass. Someone sat down too hard. "Gerald." Victoria's voice cracked the silence like a struck match. "Do something. She's trying to ruin me." My father sat still. His hands were folded on the table. He did not look at his wife. I stepped onto the stage. 220 faces stared up at me. The chandelier light was warm and merciless. I set the envelope on the podium, leaned into the microphone, and took one long breath. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," I said. "I came here because the truth couldn't wait one more day." I opened the envelope and removed the first document. On April 12, 2024, a transfer deed was filed in Charleston County conveying ownership of the Beckett family home in Mount Pleasant, assessed value $1.2 million, to a limited liability company called Hale Premier Properties. I held the deed up. The projection screen behind me lit up with a high-resolution scan, the county seal, the legal description, and at the bottom, a signature reading Gerald A. Beckett. This signature is not my father's. I advanced to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the deed signature. On the right, Gerald's authentic signature from his will, his medical power of attorney, and a notarized affidavit signed on June 3rd of this year. The differences were visible from the back of the room: the missing loop on the capital G, the inconsistent pen pressure, the mechanical quality of a hand that was copying rather than writing. This analysis was conducted by Patricia Sloan, a forensic document examiner accredited by the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners with testimony in over 40 federal proceedings. Her conclusion, stated in Report PS2 02-50087, the signature is a simulated forgery at the highest probability level recognized in the field. The ballroom was silent. Not the polite silence of a formal event. The airless silence of a room that has collectively stopped breathing. My father rose from table 1. His voice was hoarse but clear. I did not sign that document. I did not know that company existed. And I did not authorize the transfer of my home. Victoria gripped the edge of the table. Gerald, tell them you signed it. Tell them. He looked at her for the first time that evening. Then he slowly shook his head. Somewhere at table 5, a man set his fork down on his plate. The tiny clink rang out like a gavel. I pulled the second set of documents from the envelope. Between January and October 2024, 4 withdrawals totaling $380,000 were made from Gerald Beckett's individual retirement account and deposited into a savings account at Coastal Heritage Bank. The next slide appeared: redacted bank statements with the routing numbers, dates, and amounts highlighted. The account is registered under the name V. Hale. I heard a chair scrape. Someone at table 9 whispered something to the person beside them. Additionally, a supplementary credit card was opened using Gerald Beckett's Social Security number, without his knowledge or consent. Current balance: $47,000. Charges include luxury travel, designer purchases, and personal spa treatments, none of which appear in Gerald's personal records. The third slide, a separate savings account titled V. Hale Trust, holds $215,000 transferred from the Beckett's joint household checking account, disguised as routine household expenses. I set the statements on the podium. The total amount diverted from my father's assets without his knowledge or authorization is approximately $1.842 million. Under South Carolina Code Section 433510, the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, my father is 63 years old with a documented cardiac history, is a felony. Victoria turned to the room. The tears came immediately, glistening, perfectly timed, rolling down cheeks that hadn't creased with genuine emotion in years. She's lying. Her voice broke with practiced fragility. Gerald gave me access to everything. This is a family misunderstanding, not a criminal matter. How dare you turn a charity dinner into a public trial? Judge Holt spoke from his seat, his voice level as a plumb line. Ms. Hale Beckett, the evidence has been independently verified. The association is revoking the Philanthropist of the Year award, effective immediately. Victoria's mouth opened. No sound came out. Then, from table 12, a woman stood up. Helen Briggs rose with the quiet composure of a woman who had spent 16 years rehearsing this moment in her mind. "My name is Helen Briggs," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with the clarity of someone who has finally decided to stop whispering. Victoria Hale was previously married to my ex-husband, Richard Briggs, a dentist in Savannah. They married in 2005. The marriage ended in 2009. After Richard discovered that Victoria had transferred $190,000 from their joint accounts into a personal account under her maiden name. She held up a bound document. This is a certified copy of the divorce decree, Briggs v. Hale, Chatham County Superior Court, 2009. The ruling specifically cites dissipation of marital assets. She passed the decree to Judge Holt, who accepted it without a word. The murmur that had been building in the room broke like a wave. 220 people began talking at once, at first in whispers, then in full voices. I saw a woman at table 7 cover her mouth. 2 attorneys at table 3 leaned toward each other with expressions I recognized from every boardroom I'd ever worked in. The look of professionals who have just realized they were standing next to a bomb. Victoria stood frozen between the VIP table and the aisle, her champagne gown catching the chandelier light. Paige sat beside the empty chair, tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't look at her mother. She looked at the tablecloth. My father stepped away from the VIP table and walked toward me. He climbed the 2 short stairs to the stage and stood beside me at the podium. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to. Gerald Beckett, standing next to his daughter, facing the room, said everything that words could not. Victoria looked at us. Then at the 220 faces that had, until 10 minutes ago, admired her. Not one of them met her gaze. She picked up her clutch. She walked to the exit. The sound of her champagne heels striking the marble floor echoed through the ballroom long after the door closed behind her. No one followed. For a few seconds after the door closed, the ballroom held its breath. Then Judge Holt returned to the podium. The Philanthropist of the Year award for 2025 will not be conferred this evening, he said. The Low Country Bar Association will initiate a full audit of all donations received through the Hale Beckett Foundation. We ask for your patience and discretion as this matter proceeds through the appropriate legal channels. He stepped back from the microphone. The room exhaled. What happened next I did not expect. A man at table 3, tall, silver-templed, with the bearing of someone who owned the building he worked in, stood and crossed the ballroom toward me. Douglas Wren, founding partner of Wren and Partners, one of the most respected litigation firms in the Carolinas. He shook my hand. You presented that more clearly than half the attorneys I've hired in 20 years. If your father needs legal representation for the divorce or the criminal referral, here's my card. He pressed it into my palm. Pro bono. Behind him, Della Fairchild caught my eye from the press section. She nodded once. The kind of nod that means I have everything I need. I returned to the microphone one final time. The room quieted again. I didn't come here tonight to tear someone down, I said. I came because my father deserved to know the truth. Because silence isn't loyalty. It's surrender. And because no one in this room or anywhere else should have to trade their dignity for the appearance of family harmony. The applause began at table 12, Helen, steady and certain. It rippled outward through the room, not thunderous, not jubilant, but deliberate. The sound of 220 people offering something rarer than praise. Respect. My father took my arm as we descended the stage steps. His grip was firm. His eyes were clear. And for the first time in 15 years, we walked out of a room together. The drive back to Sullivan's Island took 23 minutes. My father sat in the passenger seat and didn't speak for the first 20. Then, somewhere on the bridge over the Intracoastal Waterway, with the marsh stretching out black and endless on either side, he said, "I'll file for divorce Monday." I didn't argue. I didn't comfort. I just reached over and squeezed his hand. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Victoria's things were still there. The garment bags, the monogrammed towels, the decorative pillows she'd chosen for my living room. But she was not. She'd apparently taken an Uber from the hotel. Where she went, I didn't know. I didn't look. Gerald's phone buzzed 14 times between 11 p.m. and 2 in the morning. I know because I could hear it vibrating through the guest room wall. He showed me the messages the next morning. "Gerald, please, I can explain. Don't do this to our family. Then, you're making a mistake. Then, this is all Bonnie's fault. She manipulated you." And the last one, at 1:47 a.m., "You'll regret this." Paige called me at 11:30 that night. She was crying. The ugly, raw kind of crying that strips away every performance. "Why did you do this?" "She's my mother." "I know she is," I said. "And I'm sorry you're in pain. But she stole nearly $2 million from my father, Paige. She forged his name. She was planning to take my house next. I didn't have another option." The line went quiet. Then, very softly, "I know." After we hung up, I sat on the porch in the dark. The ocean was louder at night. Or maybe I was just finally quiet enough to hear it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The way you feel when someone removes something that's been growing inside you for years. It hurts. but you're lighter. Gerald came out and sat in the chair beside me. He placed my mother's letter on the armrest between us. "Keep it," he said. "It was always yours?" Victoria's final message, "You'll regret this," wasn't an empty threat. It was a press release. By 9 a.m. on June 15th, the Low Country Daily Buzz, a local tabloid site with about 40,000 followers, ran a headline that made my stomach clench. Local philanthropist claims stepdaughter orchestrated public humiliation at charity gala. The article was built almost entirely on Victoria's interview. Tears, trembling voice, the full performance. She called me troubled. She called the gala reveal a vindictive ambush by a jealous stepdaughter who never accepted me. She said Gerald was confused and manipulated. The comments section split immediately. A disturbing number of people believed her. That poor woman was blindsided. No family business should be aired in public. Bonnie Beckett should be ashamed. I sat at the kitchen counter reading those words and felt a familiar ache. The people-pleasing instinct reaching up from somewhere deep, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I should have handled it privately. Maybe I should apologize. I called Marcus. He didn't let me finish the sentence. "Don't respond, don't post, don't call anyone. Della's piece goes live tonight. The facts will do the work." 2 hate emails arrived that afternoon, from women in Victoria's social circle, both of whom had been dinner guests at my own table in my own house, drinking my wine. One wrote, "You should be ashamed of yourself. Victoria has given more to this community than you ever will." The other simply wrote, "Karma is real, Bonnie." I thought about that word. Karma. I thought about Victoria forging my father's name, draining his retirement, hiding my mother's last letter in a locked drawer for 17 years, and still managing to make half the internet feel sorry for her. I wondered, have you ever been in a situation where you knew you did the right thing, but the world made you feel like a villain for it? If you have, tell me in the comments. Because that afternoon, I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Then, at 6 o'clock, my phone lit up with a push notification from the Charleston Society Review. Breaking full evidence of financial fraud by Victoria Hale Beckett. Sources confirmed. Della kept her word. Della Fairchild's article was 3,200 words of surgical journalism. No speculation, no adjectives, just evidence stacked like bricks. She published the forged deed alongside Patricia Sloan's forensic analysis. She printed the bank statements with the routing numbers redacted, but the amounts and account names intact. She quoted Judge Holt on the record. The evidence presented was sufficient to warrant immediate revocation of the award and referral to appropriate authorities. She included a full timeline of Victoria's financial activity, the LLC registration in 2022, the IRA withdrawals through 2024, the credit card opened without Gerald's knowledge. And she laid the Briggs divorce decree beside it like a mirror. The headline alone was enough. The philanthropist who stole. Inside Victoria Hale Beckett's double life. Within 12 hours, the article hit 127,000 views, 4,800 shares, 1,200 comments. The top-rated one, from a reader in Somerville, read, "This woman had a pattern. Gerald Beckett is lucky his daughter saved him." The Low Country Daily Buzz, the same outlet that had run Victoria's teary interview that morning, published a retraction by midnight. "We apologize for our earlier one-sided reporting and encourage readers to review the full evidence published by the Charleston Society Review." The Low Country Bar Association released a formal statement the following morning. The 2025 Philanthropist of the Year award has been permanently rescinded. The Hale Beckett Foundation's partnership status has been suspended pending a comprehensive financial audit. Within 48 hours, 3 of the foundation's largest corporate sponsors, a regional bank, a luxury car dealership, and a hospitality group, withdrew their pledges. Combined value, $420,000. Victoria's publicist released a 2-sentence statement on her behalf. Mrs. Hale Beckett categorically denies all allegations and looks forward to clearing her name through the legal process. No one quoted it. The news cycle had already moved on, but not in the direction Victoria wanted. On Monday, June 16th, my father walked into the Charleston County Family Court at 9:15 a.m., wearing a navy suit and the expression of a man who had just woken up after a very long sleep. He filed for divorce. Grounds: fraud upon the marriage and dissipation of marital assets. The petition was 14 pages long, prepared by Marcus Trent over the preceding 2 weeks, and it cited every document, every account, and every forged signature we'd uncovered. That same afternoon, Marcus drove to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office and filed a formal criminal complaint. The charges he recommended were precise: forgery in the first degree under South Carolina Code Section 1613-10. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Section 4335-10. Identity fraud for the unauthorized credit card. Each one a felony. Each one carrying potential prison time measured in years, not months. The sheriff's office opened an investigation immediately. Victoria was instructed to present herself within 72 hours. By Wednesday, she had hired Nathan Pratt, a well-known Charleston criminal defense attorney. Pratt's first move was a phone call to Marcus, proposing a settlement. Return the money, close the accounts, drop the charges, and everyone walks away quietly. Marcus relayed the offer. I didn't need 30 seconds. No settlement, I said. My father is entitled to the full protection of the law, not a handshake in a conference room. By the end of that week, Coastal Heritage Bank had frozen both the V. Hale Savings Account and the V. Hale Trust, a combined $595,000, locked until the investigation concluded. Paige called me that Thursday, her second call since the gala. Her voice was calmer this time, quieter. Can we talk? She asked. Not as enemies. I never thought of you as my enemy, Paige, I said. But you need to decide where you stand. I can't do that for you. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know. The final number arrived on July 2nd. The Low Country Bar Association's emergency audit of the Hale Beckett Foundation uncovered what Marcus had suspected from the beginning. The rot went deeper than the personal accounts. $85,000 in charitable donations had been reclassified through a series of internal transfers and quietly redirected toward Victoria's personal expenses. Event planning invoices that turned out to be catering for her private dinner parties. Administrative costs that matched the exact amount of her monthly spa membership, and a $10,000 consulting fee paid to Hale Premier Properties, LLC, the same shell company used to steal my father's house. The revised total, $1.927 million. On that same day, the Charleston County Grand Jury returned a formal indictment, 4 felony counts: forgery in the first degree, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, identity fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds. Victoria surrendered herself at the county courthouse, posted $75,000 bail, and was released with a GPS ankle monitor and a court order prohibiting contact with Gerald Beckett. The restraining order was granted the same afternoon, 200 feet, no exceptions. Della Fairchild published a follow-up. The Post and Courier, South Carolina's largest daily newspaper, picked up the story. So did the Charleston City paper. Conservative estimates place the combined readership at over 500,000. On social media, the hashtag Hale Beckett fraud trended regionally for 3 days. Victoria's name, once synonymous with charity luncheons and society page features, now returned only one kind of search result. Her defense attorney, Nathan Pratt, floated the idea of a countersuit. Defamation against me. Marcus's response was a single sentence in an email. Every statement made at the gala was supported by independently verified evidence reviewed in advance by a sitting judge. We welcome the discovery process. The countersuit was never filed. In the first week of July, after the indictment and the restraining order and the newspaper headlines had all settled into a kind of exhausted stillness, I sat down with my father on the porch of the beach house. The same porch, the same chairs. But nothing else was the same. Dad, I said, I love you. I need you to hear that first, because what I'm about to say might not sound like love, but it is. He nodded. He was listening, really listening, maybe for the first time in years. I'm not going back to being the version of me that made everyone comfortable. I spent 15 years being the quiet one, the accommodating one, the daughter who never complained because she didn't want to make trouble. That's over. If we're going to have a relationship, a real one, it has to be built on honesty. You tell me the truth. I tell you the truth. And neither of us lets anyone else rewrite the story. His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I'm going to start seeing someone, he said. A therapist. I need to understand how I let this happen. How I let someone stand between me and my own daughter for 15 years without seeing it. That's all I'm asking. That evening, I wrote an email to Paige. I kept it short and clear. I don't hate you. I never did. But I need you to understand that what your mother did was criminal. Not a misunderstanding. Not a family squabble. If you want to build something real between us, it starts with acknowledging that. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm asking you to choose honesty. I also made a phone call I'd been postponing. To Dr. Elaine Marsh, a licensed clinical social worker specializing in family trauma. My first appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Setting boundaries, it turns out, isn't a single dramatic moment on a stage. It's a series of quiet decisions made in ordinary rooms. And the hardest boundary to enforce is the one you set with yourself. The letter arrived in mid-July. Not an email, not a text, but 3 handwritten pages in a cream-colored envelope with no return address. I recognized Paige's handwriting immediately. She still dotted her I's with tiny circles, the way she had when she was 14 and I was 21, and we'd briefly, before Victoria made it clear that closeness between us was unacceptable, been something like friends. She wrote, Bonnie, I've been crying for 3 weeks. Not because my mother was arrested, because I finally realized what I've known for 15 years and refused to say out loud. I watched her treat you like you didn't exist. I watched her take your bedroom, your holidays, your place in family photos. I watched her call you the leftover at a dinner party, and I laughed along because it was easier than defending you. I was comfortable, and comfort made me complicit. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned that. I'm writing because you deserve to hear someone in this family say, I saw it. It was wrong. And I did nothing. I've started seeing a therapist. I want to be someone who tells the truth, even when it costs me something. If you're willing, I'd like to try to know you. Not as stepsisters who tolerate each other, but as 2 adults who choose honesty over convenience. I read the letter twice. The second time, I cried. She had also included something I hadn't expected, a confession. Victoria had told Paige years ago that I'd received a large inheritance from my mother and refused to share it with the family. That's why she doesn't come to holidays, Victoria had said. She thinks she's better than us. It was, of course, completely fabricated. My mother left no money. She left a letter, and even that had been stolen. I wrote back, I appreciate your courage, Paige. Let's start slow. We met at a coffee shop on King Street at the end of July. We talked for 3 hours. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't polished. But it was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with anyone who shared my last name. December 2025, 6 months later. I'm sitting on the porch of the Sullivan's Island house, the same spot where this whole story began with a glass of wine and a phone call at 11:47 p.m. The waves sound the same. The salt air tastes the same. But I am not the same woman who sat here in March. My father lives in the guest cottage now, 50 steps from the main house. He finalized his divorce in October. The settlement restored every stolen dollar to his accounts, or at least the dollars that could be recovered. He sees his therapist every Thursday. His cardiologist says his numbers are better than they've been in 3 years. Last Tuesday, he made dinner for the 2 of us. The first time he'd cooked since my mother was alive. It was terrible. I ate every bite. I went back to work, but not to Meridian. I founded Beckett Advisory Group, a solo strategic consulting practice based out of a small office on East Bay Street. My first 3 clients included Douglas Wren's firm, the man who shook my hand at the gala and offered his card. Revenue in the first quarter exceeded my projections by 14%. Victoria's trial is scheduled for March 2026. 4 felony counts. If convicted, she faces 5 to 15 years. I don't think about it as much as I used to. Paige visits the island once a month. We're not close, not yet. But we're honest. And that's worth more. Della Fairchild's follow-up article, Bonnie Beckett, the woman who chose truth over silence, was republished by Forbes Women in their Fall Voices column. I didn't read it for 2 weeks. When I finally did, I read it beside my mother's letter. The last line my mother ever wrote to me was this: "You are enough, always." Every morning I open that letter. Every morning I sit on this porch and watch the Atlantic stretch out toward the horizon. And every morning I know something I didn't know a year ago. I'm here because I chose to be. Not because someone permitted it. Not because I earned the right by silence. Because I am enough. I always was. If you stayed until the end of this story, thank you. Truly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the moment you stop shrinking so that someone else can feel tall. If you're in a relationship where you've been making yourself smaller, in your family, at work, anywhere, I hope you heard something tonight that reminded you, your boundaries are not selfish. They are survival. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and check the description. There's another story there that I think you'll see yourself in. I'll see you in the next one.